Oh, how we yearn for that day. And we have a little taste of it this morning through his word and through our fellowship as we venture into James. You know, words are pretty powerful. There's a few words that if you say in life, they can dramatically alter the rest of your life here on earth. Evan, can you think what that word might be? 2 words might alter the rest of your life, maybe just a couple weeks ago. I do. 2 words, 3 letters, and changes life for the rest of the time we're here on earth. We all look forward to figuring out what the first word that our newborns will say. What's going to be the first word? Normally it's dada, because it's all the excitement of dada is home, and it's the way it goes a lot. Also, when you think about it, the repercussions of hearing guilty, or if there's a 3-letter word put before it, not guilty, very distinct difference. Very powerful words. World War II, there was a sign that said this: loose lips might sink ships. Loose lips might sink ships. And that's what happens in life as well. Loose lips can sink lives. This morning I want to encourage you to speak well. Speak well. As you look at James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12, I'd encourage you to be there. It'll be on the screen behind me. D.A. Carson said this about going into this passage. We have to recognize this because it affects us as well. One of the first problems that may happen in a church which is being persecuted is that the believers may begin to argue with each other. The people James is writing to have been dispersed. They're under trial. Things aren't necessarily going well for them in their lands. People can take them to court, and they're going to get a guilty plea just based on the fact that they're a Christian. They're not being paid their wages. Life isn't fair. When life's not fair, sometimes our tongues go out of control. Sometimes that happens even with each other. And so James writes this to his dear brothers and sisters as he writes it to us today. Starts off in verse 1. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships, for example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. We're going to see here that we need to use our words to guide. We need to use our words to guide for good. For good. We can see that this passage is applicable to everyone. The first verse is sort of just a clause, just a notation of, hey, pay special attention. Okay? In the first century context, when you get together for a time like this, it was sort of like open mic preaching. And so James is giving a warning, hey, be cautious. We know everybody wants to be in charge. Everyone wants to make the decisions. That's not new. That's always been that way. And so he's warning them. He's saying, hey, listen up, teachers, because you use your tongue a lot. And because you use your tongue a lot, you're probably going to stumble more. But notice in verse 2 what he says. He says, we all stumble in many ways. See, T.D. Lee said it this way. He said, the concern is enlarged beyond the work of a teacher and includes all. Human beings stumble in many ways. We show that James put himself in the category of those who made up these slips of the tongue and evidence of James's humility. He incorporates himself right into his teaching. Well, what is a teacher? Looked up the complex definition. It didn't help. Thankfully, Merriam-Webster includes an option for how you describe things to kids. So here's the definition of teacher for kids. A person who passes on information or skill. I get it. That's a teacher. A person who passes on information or skill. You see, many people are teachers whether they have that label or not. Parents are teachers by default. Lots of people are teachers. You can think of it this way. It's like leadership. Leadership, when you boil it down, is simply influence. And we all have influence on people. And so we need to guide properly. We need to use our influence properly with people. That verse 2 there, the we all, anyone, this is including to everyone. Notice it talks about being perfect. The terminology here is mature. Now, it's not sinless, it's mature. There should be a progression of maturity when it concerns the tongue. Now we're given a few illustrations here of size. We're given the illustration of the bit and of rudders, and the size comparison of those objects as to what they control. And just as our tongue is very small, but it can control our body. Think of it this way, that these things, bits and rudders, they direct, okay? They direct items, things, objects, just as our tongue can direct things. And so we want to guide people properly with our words. The kids really get excited about show and tell. I think adults are just excited about show and tell. So James uses very visual examples. So this morning, we have the camel bag of mystery. If you read ahead, you'll know what pops out. So Caleb was able to bring this. So this is a horse's bit. Yes, the proper terminology for the whole thing is a bridle. I'm not a horse. So I'll keep my words short so I don't stumble. So this is the bridle. You can imagine how big a horse is. And these are the reins. These are just going behind the neck. The bit's in the mouth. So if you get a visual for how big a horse is, okay, and then just look at this tiny piece. Because out of the bridle, this piece here is just the bit that controls this big horse. Leave this up here. We could probably control people with that too. This is the smaller version of the bit that goes into the mouth. So it gives you an idea. A massive animal controlled by just a bit. The other example being used is a rudder. Okay? Brian, you have a rudder on your boat? Is it big in comparison with your boat? Yeah. And it controls where you want to go. Yeah. The estimation on the Titanic's rudder is that it's about 1.5% the size of the hull, the area of the hull. And it gives you an impression of how small a rudder is in comparison to the entire boat. I brought a little boat here confused about what the rudder is. I don't think this boat has thrusters now, so here's my boat. Guess we could have somebody bring their boat to the church parking lot or something, but the rudder is just this little piece on the end. Just steers and directs the back of the boat, takes the boat where it wants to go. So, again, a very small object controlling a very large item, the rudder of a boat. Now, what do we do with that? Well, I think there's some things to keep in mind. When you notice verse 2, okay, it's mentioning that they're able to keep their whole body in check. Verse 3, when it concerns the bit, we can turn the whole animal. Verse 4, concerning the rudder, it can steer wherever the pilot wants to go. Two observations on this. First one coming from Warren Wiersbe here. The bit must overcome the wild nature of a horse. The human tongue must also overcome contrary forces. We have an old nature that wants to control us and make us sin. There are circumstances around us that would make us say things that we ought not say. Sin on the inside and pressure on the outside are seeking to get control of the tongue. Seeing that doesn't give an excuse for it. Dealing with the flesh. Lots of good things come from these items. I want you to see that. The tongue can be used for great good. James talks a lot about what the negatives are, and we need to understand the power of our tongue, but we also need to grasp that it can be used for great things in people's lives and accomplish the gospel mission. Thinking about those that have influence on people, education is a good thing. We've got to teach younger ones how to grow up in the basic levels, trying to teach our children how to function in life. Teachers are good. Just watched a video dealing with bullying and the influence that just one person can have in a student's life can make all the difference in that scenario. All the difference. Just the power of one person. That's the influence we can have on people. That's how it can be used for good. Or think about it with horses. With control of this bit, taking a wild animal and controlling it. What about pack horses? How many have benefited from having pack horses? That's awesome. Awesome opportunity. Or think of therapeutic riding. Horses are used for great things. How about ships? Some people make their living on a ship. They allow us to harvest fish. What about mercy ships? Mike's talking about being on a mercy ship. What about a floating hospital? Those are good things. Cargo ships taking goods into ports. Places that don't have any other way to get things in. Ships can be used for good. Horses can be used for good. Teachers can be used for good. Our tongues can be used for good. We need to see that. That's why I'm encouraging you to speak well, to use your words as a guide for good, just as the bit guides and the rudder guides those items. The other example I want to show you about an observation of these things, James mentions the strong winds. Strong winds that can create waves and wind that goes against a boat's direction. In life, we can be there. The winds and the waves, they crash upon us. But an encouraging word to a person in the trial can be that rudder that keeps that person on task, keeps them heading the right direction. That's the influence a word can have in a person's life when winds and waves are overwhelming. Be that rudder. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, therefore, it's the closing of Paul's letter here, encourage one another and build each other up just as in fact you're doing. Isn't that an encouraging word from Paul? To recognize here that he's encouraging this encouragement of one another, the building and lifting of each other up, just like you're doing. Just like you're doing. That's how we can speak well. We speak well by using our words as a guide for good. We also use our words in context. Verses 5 through 8, we need to see the power of our words and know the context. Let's read verses 5 through 8 here. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. Now, verse 6, this is getting our attention to the sin that the tongue can bring. John MacArthur says that verse 6 underscores that the tongue's evil can be extended beyond the individual to affect everything in a sphere of influence. If we're being controlled by the flesh, not walking in the Spirit, our tongue can take us wayward. And where the tongue goes, the body follows. And so it can lead to sin. In verse 7, it mentions these different kinds of animals. And James is making a general statement here for illustration. This isn't a scientific proof for textbooks. It's these different kinds of animals have been tamed. It's kind of interesting to think through that. Even dolphins or whales have been tamed. It's kind of interesting to think through. But the important thing we need to see here are the forces that are at work. We see two illustrations. We see fire, and at the end of verse 8, we see this poison. The illustration here is of a viper, of a snake, the venom, the poison. Well, what does fire do, and what does venom do? Well, James wants us to know that it destroys. It destroys. It's powerful. Powerful. What about this fire? Well, I've learned in Alaska these are very handy. Fire. Apparently it was on. Well, that's no big deal, right? Nobody's nervous. I think this is something Alaskans really grasp. If it would have been July, let's use July, and it hadn't rained for 2 weeks, and everything outside was pretty crispy, and you notice Brian had his burn barrel right along the tree line, walking out there with boxes, and you saw me walk out with my torch. You'd be a little concerned, because Alaskans are really concerned about wildfire in the summertime. One spark, this little propane torch, can wipe out acres and acres and acres. We saw it last summer. It happened. However, if you saw me going up in my house to a wood stove, and I have a propane torch in the middle of the wintertime, you probably wouldn't be very concerned. Why? Because that same spark in a controlled environment can produce great things. You see, it's all a matter of context. All a matter of context. The warmth that warm words can provide to the soul, or of God. When a fire is lit, it begins to consume. This is the danger part. There's also lasting effects. You see, even after that fire has been put out, the damage is done. We have to recognize that our words are the same way. Just as a spark, once it's out there, once it's lit, even if it's put out later, it's out there. Whether that's face-to-face with people, or whether that's how you use your typing on Facebook. Once it's out, and it can begin to cause destruction. Even after you put it out, there's still the effects of the fire. Even the remains of smoke can deem a house unlivable. Fire could be out, could have been a small fire, but the smoke alone can damn that house. Clearing the air can take a long time. A long time. Whether that's with people, verbally. You think about the things that have been said to you over the years. You might have some things in your mind that you remember people saying. And they might not have thought much of it. But maybe it lit a spark. Maybe it wounded. It's not easily let go. The smoke remains. I grew up close to Centralia, Pennsylvania. It's a ghost town now. There was an underground coal seam fire. They tried to put it out multiple times. It still smolders. So simply because of the smoke, the lasting effects of the fire, no one's in that town. Benjamin Franklin said it this way: a slip of the foot you may soon recover, but a slip of the tongue you may never get over. Our words are powerful, just like a fire. How about this poison, these vipers? Now that's another one of James's illustrations. So, just kidding, I didn't bring a snake. But what would it be like if I was just to let out 6 vipers, just dump them out of the bag? Mass chaos and panic. I'd be the first one out of here. I don't even have a rubber snake for you because I don't do snakes. They're deadly. You see, evil words are as deadly as a viper's venom. It can kill, but can also give life. According to Medical Daily, scientists have been studying the medical properties of various snake venoms for decades. For example, certain vipers have been shown to have anti-tumor properties. Others have antibacterial and painkiller features. In general, it's a powerful weapon and can cause death. The right way, it can be used for life. That's why we need to speak well. You see, words are powerful, and we need to know the context. Fire in a wood stove is a great thing. Using snake venom to create medical things is good. But we've got to know the context. And one of the things we can do to help us with that is to season our words. Colossians 4:5 and 6. Be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. That can be a fundamental verse in life, especially the way we act towards outsiders and our words there, but with everyone, full of grace, seasoned. Sometimes we don't know how to answer people, but if you walk the conversation with seasoning, the Lord may guide your thoughts. That's how we speak well, in context, seasoning our words. In verses 9 through 12, we understand that we have to have words that are consistent with our character. Okay? We need to have consistent character with our words, with your words. Verses 9 through 12 say, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing, my brothers and sisters. It should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. As it concerns verses 9 through 10, D.A. Carson says that in James's day, the king or emperor would set up a statue in the cities of his realm. If anyone insulted or cursed the statue, they were treated as if they had cursed the emperor to his face, for the statue was the image of the emperor. James's readers understand what James is saying here. We need to grasp that too, that even if they said it to that statue, it was as if they were saying it to the actual person. How much more for the children of God? You see, understanding that your neighbor is made in the image of God can revolutionize how you treat your fellow neighbor. That simple concept alone, that they're created in God's image. You see, in Genesis 1:27, it says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, in the Jewish teaching, rabbis taught that no one should say, let my neighbor be put to shame. For then you put to shame the one who is in the image of God. So you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't curse upon your neighbor. You wouldn't wish shame upon them, because then you're shaming the image of God. You see, if you're cursing human beings, then you're cursing God's image. God doesn't take that lightly. It's contradictory with what our character is to be. Now we have some descriptions here of springs, of water coming forth, and plants that are producing fruit. You see, springs and plants, they produce. That's what they do. What we need to be producing are words of blessing. Words of blessing. As it concerns the spring, the language has to deal with, if you're traveling through the biblical lands, you'd be pretty familiar with the Dead Sea area. The Dead Sea area has a lot of salt content. And so if you're traveling through the Dead Sea, you're eventually going to need to find some water source. And if you're in that area especially, you're just not going to go and fill up your jug and start drinking. You're going to check to see what kind of water it is, whether it's sweet water or bitter water. So I need a volunteer. The volunteer needs to, okay, Austin, come on up. This will be good, because what I want to know is if this water comes from the spring over at Victory. Okay? And just make a comfortable. I'll drink some first so you know that it's safe. Okay. So you let me know if that comes from Victory. That's not Victory's water? That's contrary to the nature of Victory's water. Okay, thank you. Do you want to go for it? No. Salty water, it's obvious. That's not the water that comes from Victory. It's the same situation with our words. It should be consistent with our character. The words here for fresh water is sweet. You've heard of sweet water. Okay, it's good water. We know that sweet water is not going to produce bitter salt water. Those waters don't come from the same. As it concerns figs and olives and grapes, they're all good fruits. They're consistent with the plants. So we'll go to our local garden. So Norm, if I was to say, Norm, I got these all off the same plant, is that possible? No. No? Raspberries don't come from blueberry bushes, blueberries don't come from raspberry bushes. Why would rhubarb come from any type of that bush, right? It's obvious those fruits are produced by what their plant was designed to produce. We're designed to produce good words. That's the kind of words we're to have. Our words should be good. They should be sweet. They need to be consistent with our Christian character. That's why if we're going to speak well, we need to be consistent with our words, and that our words should be a blessing. We need to be a blessing with our words. Ephesians 4:29 says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." When it benefits them, it's a blessing. You can be a blessing with your words. So we see from James different ways to encourage people, how to season our words, how to be a blessing with our words. Some people, when they approach the James, they see it this way. And I want to hedge against this. J.L. Wilson says, James' teaching isn't encouraging. That's the truth of it. If you dive down in it and see the power the tongue has, and how wicked it is, it's not very encouraging. So what do? Do we give up and give in to every temptation we lie, sow discord, curse, and talk about someone? Should we just not say anything? Should we just be mute? Of course not. And that is exactly his point. Because the temptation is ever with us to do evil with our tongues, we must be on our guard and constantly submit this temptation to the Lord. Think about the tongue. The tongue actually does more than just talk. Austin knew that spring water that I had didn't come from Victory because his tongue has taste buds. His tongue tastes. It's used more than just for talking. The tongue is multivocational, we would say. We use words a lot in life. We need to use words. If we're going to have daily living in a community, we've got to communicate. We use words to do that. If we're going to cultivate relationships with each other, we use words to cultivate relationships. If we're going to follow through with God's commands to share the gospel and make disciples, it's going to require us to use our tongues. So the answer isn't to be mute. The answer is to surrender it to the Lord. Warren Wiersbe gives us an option for 12 words that we should use. He says 12 words that can transform your life. If you use these words and sincerely mean what they say from your heart, you will find that God will use you to be a blessing and encouragement to others. There are only 12 of them, but they work. Please and thank you. When you use these 3 words, you are treating others like people, not things. You are showing appreciation. I'm sorry. These 2 words have a way of breaking down the walls and building bridges. I love you. Too many people read romance into these words, but they go much deeper than that. As Christians, we should love the brethren and even love our enemies. I love you is a statement that can carry tremendous power. And I'm praying for you. And be sure that you are. When you talk with God about people, then you can talk to people about God. Our private praying for people helps us in our public meeting with people. I like those 12 words. I could give you a list of words you shouldn't say or ways you shouldn't use your tongue. Those words are words that you are to have. These are characteristics that you are to cultivate. If you were to sum it up in one statement, if you just go to Proverbs 12, verse 18, it says, "The words of the reckless pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." That's what we need, and that's what everyone needs. I'd encourage you to seek forgiveness when the tongue doesn't do what it's supposed to. I'd encourage you to forgive others that ask for that forgiveness and need that forgiveness. Why? Well, because we know that we all struggle. James clearly says that we all struggle. It shouldn't shock us when somebody missteps with a word. We've been there. It's happened to us. We need to keep that in mind. And if you've been discouraged by a word, take it to Jesus. Because Jesus has been there. He knows what that's like. Jesus was accused of being a drunkard and a glutton. We know it's not so. He was accused of working for Satan. It wasn't true either. If you think about to his time on the cross, as he's bearing his cross, he's being hurled insults. If you've been wounded by words, take it to Jesus. He can heal you from those wounds. So what's the whole point? I think James's whole point goes way back to verse 2 with this word perfect. He wants to encourage that, this maturity. You see, our word use should be continually sanctified as our lives are being continually sanctified as well. As we grow, our vocabulary for godly language should grow. We should use it more wisely. We should heed away from negative word use. Think of it this way. When you first drilled the well up at the parsonage, the water came out kind of dirty. But over time, that water has gotten cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. And so it should be for the Christian. As they walk their life with Jesus, our words and our language should be more encouraging to one another. So how do we do that? Well, we need to allow God to use our tongue. You see, the problem comes in when we allow our flesh to use the tongue, when we want to be the voice heard versus God. And so we need to allow God to use our tongue. We need to be a voice for him. And how do you do that? Well, I talk a lot about being in step with the Spirit. We've got to get our tongue in step with the Spirit, you see. We got to commit our tongues to the power of God. And most importantly, we got to allow God to tame our tongue. We can't do it ourselves. It's by his grace. I encourage you this week, as you think about your word use, know that it can be used for guiding the good. You think about how a horse is guided. Even though it has a contrary nature, it can be controlled. Or a ship so big, even when it's going through tough times, battered and barred by the wind, can still be steered the same direction and stay on course. We can use our words to encourage people. We do need to know our words are powerful. We do need to know what they can do, and also the context of which to use them. And so knowing that we need to season our words is important in conversation with each other. And then most importantly, be consistent with your character. May your words match your character, and your character is a Christian. And so that's how it should match. That should cause your words to be a blessing to people. Speak well, my brothers and sisters. Let's pray. Father, this is right where we are. Lord, it'd be interesting to take a poll who struggled with their tongue just making it to church this morning, because it's so easy to do. Lord, we can't tame it on our own. We've tamed animals. We've tamed beasts. And yet this little thing can cause such destruction. Lord, help us to know that power, that we'd use our words wisely. Lord, help us to seek forgiveness when we're unwise, and to forgive forgiveness, because we've all stumbled in this area. Lord, most importantly, help us to surrender our tongues to use our tongues for you. And Lord, that in that, our speech would be walking in step with the Spirit. And it'd be used of you. And we'd be encouraging each other with our words. Lord, thank you for James's illustrations and how they're timeless. And Lord, thank you that you've given us a very applicable sermon to life this morning. Lord, help us to apply it, even in this week as we may be discouraged, to come to your mercy seat and ask forgiveness. Lord, we know you're there, and we're there often. Lord, help us to continually keep a clean slate with you and stay in step. In Jesus' name, amen.